Alright guys, season 3 of Invincible is here, and I'm really excited for this season. We're 3 episodes in. I'm a little late to making the video, but it's alright. First time doing it, so I'm excited. If you haven't seen Invincible, I highly suggest it. It's based off the Image Comics run back a while ago now. It's made a huge dent in the superhero entertainment space as the last few years by a lot. It's really come in swinging with the boys as well. But we have a lot to unpack in these first 3 episodes, so let's get into it. So in episode 1, we find out that Mark has significantly increased his physical stats, and we get a good peek into all of his new training, which is something that's really cool, because I feel like we don't see a ton into like training programs and stuff with superheroes, so I think that's pretty cool. And speaking of new powers, his little brother Oliver, half Thrax and half Viltrumite, now has developed his powers at like a very young age, which is also what happened in the comics. And we get to see him figuring out how to use them at a younger age than Mark, which is really cool. We also finally have Mark and Eve telling each other their feelings about each other. I'm so glad Amber's gone. She's really annoying, and she's honestly way worse in the show than she was ever in the comics. Can't stand her. But Mark goes to, I think, Africa to see Eve, where she's living. And, they tell each other how they feel, but it takes a really quick turn when we find out Doc Seismic escapes imprisonment, and him and all of his underground monsters kidnap all the superheroes except for Invincible and Eve. So basically, Eve and Invincible go off together, and they try to save all the superheroes. They get overpowered, of course, by all of them. They get put into these containment eggs with all the other superheroes. And because there's no one left, Cecil has to send in his undercover operatives that no one knows about, which is Sinclair's Reaniman, and then also Darkwing. And if you guys don't know who those are, Sinclair is like this psychopath who was killing people and making them into these messed up cyborg things. And Darkwing is someone who is basically just killing people in cold blood. So it's definitely an iffy thing. Mark clearly sees that Cecil sent these guys, and he's like, what the heck? Like, he is pissed because he's the one who took these guys down. So to see Cecil using those guys for evil and being like, these guys should be put in prison, they should have pretty much nothing, it sets a huge different tone for that end of the episode, kicking off the next episode. In episode 2, you get like a brief kind of origin of Cecil. They don't go right back into what happened at the end of the previous episode, but basically Cecil was working for the GDA. He wasn't the head of it at the time, and he was a little bit more like Mark, we find out. He was an operative on the field saving people, and he got into it with these villains who were gonna let out this gas that pretty much, takes all, it just breaks you down completely from just melts your skin and your bones and all this. We find out that's how Cecil has the scar, except that piece of scar that was left on his face, it was actually the only skin he had left, but they didn't want him to replace it. He didn't want them to replace it because he wanted a reminder of the mistake he made by letting those people die. Even though he saved thousands, I believe it was 17 people that still died from it. Funny enough, the head of the GDA at the time, I'm going to have to look up his name, he saved those 2 guys who made that poisonous bomb. And they came and saved Cecil and him from the Lizard League. And Cecil shot both of them in the head because he doesn't want their help. He doesn't want to work with them, just like Mark. And the head of the GDA throws him in prison. Cecil makes like this super organized prison where it's not hectic anymore and people aren't killing each other left and right. And once the head of the GDA wants to step down, he tells Cecil he wants him to take his place, but that's the only way out of the prison. And then we kind of find out afterwards that Cecil is now this more cynical I guess kind of narcissistic version of him that we see now in the future. So after we see all that, we then go back to present, where Mark is confronting Cecil about Sinclair, the Reaniman, and Darkwing. Cecil then lures Mark into the White Room, and Mark's like, what's going on? And the Reanimen show up because he's scared of what Mark's doing. He's intimidating him. So he has the Reanimen all go after him, and he lights off this chip in Mark's brain that they put there at some other point when Mark was probably hurt in the hospital where he was vulnerable. And it sends this like crazy vibration through his head, this sound like a dog whistle kind of, and it just brings Mark to his knees. He can't do anything. His whole equilibrium's off. He can't even fly, or barely he can fly. Mark ends up stumbling his way to find the Guardians, and half the Guardians help Mark and fight off the Reaniman, stop Cecil from basically killing him. And then Cecil, when Mark gets away from it, gets the chip out of his ear, or not the chip out of his ear, robot blocks off the signal that's going to his head, and he stops Cecil and tells him he's never going to work for him again, and chokes him out, just about. And then Mark flies off. Fans died, and they came over to replace them. And Black Samson, I believe. In this episode, we finally officially get Mark and Eve together as well, which honestly in the comics, all the comics I've ever read, they're honestly some of my, probably one of my favorite couples together. I don't love Eve in the show as much yet. Hopefully she gets better. She's still good. She's not as good as she was in the comics, in my opinion. And then at the end of the episode, we see Nolan Grayson, Omni-Man, come to Earth for the first time, and we see Cecil talk to him for the first time, which is also really cool. So things are now heating up big time as we go into episode 3. In episode 3, we start off with a very different vibe. We get a glimpse into the life of Tether Tyrant and Magnamaniac, which in the show, they're boyfriends, they're a couple, and I'm not sure if that's what it is in the comics. I don't mind it really, as long as things don't feel forced or weird. It's not a big deal to me, but it's cool. It's completely mute, like we don't get anyone talking, we just kind of see all the stuff they go through as supervillains, all the hard times, they were homeless, what draws them in to becoming a supervillain, because that's not really their first choice necessarily, but they make not the best decisions throughout. They're not necessarily like bad people, but because of those decisions, it leads them to a life of misfortune, basically. They go back to a life of crime so they can get money, so they don't have to live like this. That part of the episode ends with Mark coming in, defeating them, and actually Oliver coming in and trying to help as well. And in this episode, this is where we kind of get Mark to really start to talk to Oliver about his powers and trying to train him, which is cool. We get to see a lot of good conversations. It's really interesting to see Oliver as this kid who has these powers is trying to understand humanity, because he's born with powers, and to him at first he thinks he's more superior to other humans, especially Mark as his brother, and then Omni-Man as his dad. And he hears all these stories about Omni-Man, and he wants to be like him, and he doesn't really understand like the grasp of how bad what their dad did to Earth. They both get new suits as well, which is cool. We see Oliver wanting to be Kid Omni-Man, and Mark having to explain to him why he can't go as that name, because there's going to be a lot of people angry. And more importantly, we get Mark's new blue suit, which I'm really excited for, because during the comics, that's my favorite period, is when he has the blue suit. If you guys haven't noticed, the blue suit kind of represents the changing of Mark becoming more of an adult, and you can see takes on way more stress, and things in his life get very dark, and it keeps getting darker. It's really good, but you can see Mark start to buckle under this pressure, and we're going to see him make decisions he shouldn't make, because all of that pressure of trying to save the world, like the Viltrumite invasion, everything, it's a lot on him. I won't go into it much more. It's not what this video is about, but just think about that. But going back to a big theme of this episode is Oliver not understanding the importance of humanity and like the delicateness, especially having that power. He doesn't understand the importance of life and death. And that's when we get him just killing the Maulers. And then you see that kiddish thing in him where he just wants to lie. Like he pretended that one of the Maulers came at him or whatever, or it was an accident, but he just killed him in cold blood, basically. After this, of course, Mark talks to him, and so does their mom. He tries to talk to them about the importance of human life and all that. At the very end of that conversation, we see a little hovering ball in the sky, and Mark goes and gets it right away, and then it cuts to, well, the voice of Angstrom Levi. So he's alive, guys. That means a lot of things. So after these 3 episodes, I'm going to talk about what I'm most excited about and also some of my concerns. So basically, what I'm most excited about is to see the change in Mark's character, because it's going to change a lot. His decision making is going to change. There's going to be a lot of character development, if that's what you want to call it, in the season. And Angstrom Levi being alive, guys, is huge. Because if you guys didn't read the comics, this means the Invincible War is coming. And the Invincible War is Angstrom Levi goes across every dimension and gets evil Invincibles to come and invade this planet, Mark's planet, Prime Mark. And it's huge. There's a lot of things that happen. A lot of people get hurt. A lot of things get destroyed, and it's crazy. And after that battle, it only gets crazier, because once things are just starting, everyone's just starting to clean things up, and they're just kind of taking a breath now that it's over. I mean, then we get Conquest, who comes down at that time, and that is my favorite part of the whole series. That is, in my opinion, the best fight in the whole series. It tests Mark the most. Think about this. Think about you have one guy who can do anything against these aliens, and they have one of the strongest ones come down, and the only thing keeping that planet from being alive is your strongest guy, who is not strong enough to fight them yet, have to defend the planet against him. And it's madness. Just to backtrack a little bit though, also in the Invincible War, we get some really cool cameos. Tech Jacket, who is one of my favorite characters in Invincible, especially after reading his own comics. He's a really cool character, so I hope we get to see him a good amount. I hope we get to see him more, actually. And then we also see cameos from Spawn and Fire Breather, who I love Fire Breather. I read the comics, but especially from that movie they made about him back probably like 15 years ago. I love that movie. It's almost like it's gotten worse over the last 3 seasons, but it's just like all the characters look kind of weird, especially the girls. Not even like they just look. Everyone looks like a guy, kind of. It's just kind of off-putting a little bit. But yeah, and again, I've seen people complain about the animation. It's not amazing. I just hope they make it really good throughout the fights, and it seems good enough to me so far. But yeah, guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you really enjoyed it. I really want to try to make this a good place for people to come and kind of listen to things that they like, and I want it to be a community. I want your guys' input I want you to know what I can do better. If I'm talking too much, if I'm not talking enough. I want to know your opinions in the comments. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say. But yeah, so if you could let me know, that would be great.
Just come back for fun. Because it's great being alive with you.
Good reason.